Hello and welcome to our Friday evening session of the Christian Meditation Group of St Mary's Church in Killarney. You're very welcome. Welcome to those who are joining us on our live streaming channel, and welcome also to those who are on our catch-up recording on YouTube. It's lovely to know that you are there joining us and participating with our group. I made the announcement earlier on our mailing list that we would seek to reconvene our in-person meeting of our meditation group in St Mary's Church on a Friday evening at 7 p.m. and that once we knew that the members had all been double vaccinated. So if you're expecting to receive your second vaccine and want to let me know by text when that will be, then I can gauge the right moment to reconvene our in-person session. If a sufficient number of people have received their second vaccine, then we can go ahead, and those who are yet waiting will still be able to participate because I will be continuing to do the live streaming from the church when we do reconvene there. And then when you have your second vaccine, give it a few days to settle in, and then you'll be able to join us again at the church. So please do keep me informed so that I can announce the appropriate date for our joining together in person. So tonight's session of our meditation prayer group will proceed in the normal manner. After our meditation, I will introduce a topic for us to reflect upon in the space of a few minutes at the end of the session. So let us now prepare for our meditation. We will close our eyes in a moment and then take some time to relax our muscles and rest the body before we bring in our sacred word, our mantra, Maranatha, at the sound of the gong. So let us close our eyes now. So, I hope your meditation was a pleasant experience for you. One of the things that I have become aware of in these sessions is the presence of each and all of you here in my study as we join together through time and space. The sense of you all being joined together is a strong one and is very uplifting and very supportive. It's a nice feeling to have. So, as we come towards the end of our Friday evening session, and I want to address a question that was posed to me a short while ago, and that is to identify and understand the difference between the concept of self-love and of the ego. We often talk about the ego in these sessions, but I want to explore briefly with you and get you to think about this difference. The idea of self-love comes from the two great commandments which Jesus refers to in the Gospels, the second of which is to love your neighbour as yourself. And that of course implies something we might call self-love. But there is also another form of love of the self which is preconditioned by our ego. And we often talk about the two as if they are different things. But in a sense they are. They are different things, but the difference is quite a subtle one and is not so immediately obvious in the way that we speak about them. So I want to briefly to dwell upon that and to get you to think about yourself in these terms. If we think of the ego and its form of self-love as something which is bad, and if we think of the self-love that the second of the great commandments invites us and in a sense requires of us as good, then we are missing something. Because in actual fact what we need to think of is not a dualism, not a dichotomy, not of good and bad being opposite sides of a coin, if you will, but actually to think of these things as being different parts of a spectrum of evaluation, not of hard value, but of a spectrum of worth. And if you will, if you want to imagine a rainbow as a spectrum, nobody is going to call the red end of the spectrum or the violet end of the spectrum good or bad. They're going to think of them as being different parts of something. So when we look at the idea of self-love or love in general, what we're thinking of here, in the spiritual sense at least, is this idea of them being on a spectrum. And so that means that the self-love which is enjoined of us by the commandment is that form of self-love which is the one that God desires for us and has made us for. This idea that we may love ourselves as it were in the way that Christ loved himself. And that the other part or other place on this spectrum is what the ego is doing. In a sense, the ego is trying to emulate that form, but its starting position is in error. Its starting position is the position of that which wants to protect itself and is focused on itself primarily. The form of love which Jesus expresses for us and to us is the kind of love that doesn't think of itself primarily. and that is where the difference lies. So on the spectrum of love, the ego is of a different quality and is of a kind which is not as desirable for us to be in. So that means that the self-love of the ego is not bad in its own right, but is bad because of the effect that it has upon us, because it amplifies this idea of oneself being the primary focus, and therefore the self-love is for oneself, whereas the self-love that Christ engenders and invites us to express is the kind of self-love that has others as the primary focus. And that is what we call humility, that the self-love of the scriptures is the humble form of love of ourselves that doesn't put ourselves first. And that is the crucial difference. So I want you to think about that for a moment, and think about your own appreciation of yourself. And are you fighting against this idea of the ego being a bad thing, and fighting against the idea of the love the ego has, a kind of selfish love that puts yourself first? Or are you thinking in the other way, in the way that Jesus expresses for us? So let's just take a few moments to think about that in relation to ourselves, and to come to some form of understanding of that as it relates to us. So let's take a few moments now. So this moment of reflection upon ourselves will perhaps have drawn us to recognize some aspects of the way in which we have perceived ourselves. Because after all, if you think about it, if we have the self-love that Jesus represents for us, the self-love for ourselves, then how is it possible that the ego, which we encapsulate, if you will, is a bad thing? How is that to be the case? What we're being led to here is this idea that with the proper understanding, the better biblical understanding of the notion of self-love, we actually come to realize that the ego is better treated as though a wayward child would be treated, a child that had mistaken the reasons for its action, had set off from the wrong starting point in a task or an obligation or an expectation, and therefore ended up with something that it didn't necessarily want to end up at. You feel compassion, you feel love, you feel a kind of tenderness towards the child that is led in that sort of way. And so I suspect what we are being invited to is to consider not that the ego is bad in its outright sense, but that it is trying to do something with something that is not suited to that particular usage, that particular aspect. Self-love is not suited to selfishness, and that's why it goes awry. That's why it gets mistaken results and amplifies the error from which it started. So after having reflected upon that and having meditated also in this session, it's now time to wind up our session. So I do encourage you with your daily meditation practice, and please do let me know by text when you expect to have your second vaccine, so that I can gauge when we may meet together in person for our Friday evening sessions in church here in Killarney. So may God bless you all.